So here we go. Um, we hopefully this will start to work. Hey, there are dinosaurs in my Bible. I've thought of many different talk names for this, titles for this talk, and it's really not my favorite title, but it got billed that way, so I'm sticking with it, and it's fine. It'll work. It wasn't, but well, you'll see. I kind of diverged from that specific topic, but we will see. And this is a picture of me. The words don't matter too much, but it's a beautiful picture of Mount St. Helens. I was fortunate to go out there a couple of years ago. Okay, so let's just talk dinosaurs for a few minutes. This is a conventional definition of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are of a diverse group of reptiles. They were the dominant terrestrial vertebrates for over 160 million years in the late Triassic period, about 230 million years ago, until the end of the Cretaceous period, about 65 million years ago, when the Cretaceous tertiary extinction event caused the extinction of most dinosaur species except for some birds. And you see they're mixing two ideas there that we'll speak to a little bit more in a minute. That's generally considered to be this asteroid crash in the Yucatan Peninsula. We're not going to go into that too much, but that's the current popular theory for the cause of this mass extinction. The fossil record indicates that birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs as opposed to sauropod. Theropod dinosaurs during the Jurassic period, and most paleontologists regard them as only a group of dinosaurs the only group of dinosaurs to have survived until this present day. So that's the Wikipedia kind of definition of dinosaurs. I wanted to put it out there. We're not denying that is their definition. I deny that this is true, and you'll see why. But it's not that I'm unaware of it. The dates are the biggest issue, and then the second and closely tied biggest issue is that dinosaurs and birds somehow are related evolutionarily through some sort of common descent, but we'll get to that as well. Okay, what about the word dinosaurs? It's comes from a coin that was put together by Richard Owen, a pretty famous paleontologist in the early 19th century. They'd been digging up these huge bones for over a decade and came up with this dinosaur, terrible, powerful, wondrous is the Deinos portion, and lizard for Sauros. And so we have, by the way, sauropod, lizard-hipped dinosaurs, by the way. But anyway, there is also on this screen, hopefully you can see just a touch on the anatomy here that makes dinosaurs a little different. You can see the sprawling shoulders on the left, the way that a lizard would support its body weight. And that's pretty clear when you look in the fossil record and when you look at lizard anatomy, as opposed to the dinosaurs and mammals in the middle that are more pillar oriented. And then there's even a third type that we won't have to get to too much, but just notice that weight centered over the legs as opposed to the sprawling stance of the lizard on the left. We'll go a little further. Okay, so let's get a few basics out of the way. On what day did God create the dinosaurs? Well, let's go to Genesis for that. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. So along with all of the other land animals and man, dinosaurs were created, according to Genesis, on the sixth day. Also, notice the emphasis on kind here. That is such a scientifically prescient insert there. I just find remarkable, especially in this age of epigenetics. But we may get to that in another talk. But as far as what day, it was the sixth day. Okay, beyond Genesis, what book of the Bible describes dinosaurs? Well, we have some nice references in Job we want to look at. Look at the behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. Well, that could be a lot of different animals. What strength he has in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are close knit. And it's really that 17th verse that separates this from elephants and hippopotamuses. Your Bible may even have a footnote that says, oh, that's probably a hippopotamus. Well, the tail wouldn't fit that. This is a remarkable beast. That's why it's being pointed out to Job. In fact, look at the behemoth. So this is not something that existed before Job. Job's called to look at it. He's saying, hey, note this. So this is a contemporaneous creature. Going a little further, his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God. Now that I think is very remarkable. There's some remarkable animals but this ranks first. So this is obviously being called out as special, and Job is going to note that. This is not to persuade him, but to remind him of this fact. When the river rages, he is not alarmed. He is secure, though the Jordan should surge against his mouth. So this is a beast that can stand in a mighty river, even a surging river, and not be daunted by that. So I think it's fairly hard to put too many animals. In fact, I can't think of any animal that fits all of these criteria except for the dinosaurs, which we now know existed based on the bones we find in the fossil record. Can anyone capture him by the eyes or trap him and pierce his nose? Here it's almost a challenge that God's putting forth, this thing. Job, this thing's really, really remarkable. And of course, when we look at the relative size of the larger dinosaurs compared to men, they are truly enormous and remarkable creatures. And in Job 41, going a little further, a second beast is described. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fish hook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Obviously a rhetorical question, making the point that this is a fearsome beast. Can you fill its hide with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? We certainly can kill whales, but this would be a challenge. If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing it is false. The mere sight of it is overpowering. I think that's a remarkable description. But it doesn't use the word dinosaur. Of course, it would have trouble using the word dinosaur since the word wasn't coined until about 1842. So it'd be hard to find the word dinosaur in your Bible since King James was 1611 and older translations, they didn't have the word dinosaur. We'll see what word they did have and how it was used here in a moment. But a couple other questions relative to dinosaurs in the Bible. Well, would that mean that if dinosaurs were created on the sixth day, that they were therefore on the ark? And I think the answer is yes, because all of the animals, all of the land animals were represented on the ark. And so here I put a couple pictures together. You can see that, again, the relative large dinosaur compared to man. But actually, if you look at dinosaurs from the fossil record, the average size of the dinosaurs was about the size of a chicken. It doesn't mean they were a bird, but it does mean they weren't even necessarily waist high. Most of these odd-shaped and various dinosaur forms were not the very large ones that get a lot of the media notoriety. But there's a second aspect to this. If you're going to put an animal on the ark, the purpose of that animal being on the ark would be to repopulate the earth when he got off the ark. Now, if you're going to pick something to repopulate the planet, would you pick two oldsters or would you pick two juveniles that were at the beginning of their reproductive cycle as opposed to something near or in the middle of their reproductive cycle? And I think the answer is you wouldn't pick the biggest dinosaurs, you'd pick young dinosaurs. And if you look at the size, the relative size of the ark, and we cover this in a lot of different talks, and I won't go into it much here, but just to show the picture, I thought this was an interesting picture that a little hard to see if your screen is small, but we see you see giraffes here, and you do see some sort of dinosaurs and elephants, other large animals all going up into the ark, and an artist representation there. And if you look at the measurements given in the ark, there is actually plenty of room for all of the animals that we would need to fit on the ark to get a representation of all the major kinds through the worldwide cataclysmic flood. So in and of itself, there's no reason that the ark couldn't have held dinosaurs. Okay, what about another aspect of this dinosaur growth stuff is that this is relatively recently discovered, is that they apparently underwent a growth spurt. The first few years, they didn't grow that fast. In fact, there's now evidence, and this is from an article on creation.com, but it references several secular articles, that dinosaurs sort of at least this type of dinosaur, underwent a growth spurt around 5 years. And so there was plenty of time to take a 3 or 4 year old dinosaurs onto a pair of dinosaurs onto the ark, and then they would get off the ark after the year, and their growth spurt would occur after that. And therefore, there wouldn't be a problem with, again, having dinosaurs near the front of their life on the ark, and then they grow into these enormous creatures that we find after the ark departure. Okay, I mentioned the Bible has other words that it uses, and we find that the reference, the typical words, and I'll get to those in a second, the Hebrew words and Greek words for dinosaur, are interpreted as dragon in most cases, dragons or dragons, in some cases serpents or whales. And so the actual term appears over and over, and your modern translations try to find, sometimes they'll use the word dragon, but sometimes they'll substitute in wolves, wild dogs, monster, things like this. But it's not that the word has changed, it's that the understanding and the, if you will, bias of translators today is to say, well, it can't have been dinosaurs. We know they died out 67 million years ago. Therefore, they must have meant crocodiles, or they must have meant something else. Well, in point of fact, the word that is used was interpreted dragons until we decided we were smarter than that. But aren't dinosaur fossils millions of years old? I mean, what about that 67 million year old thing? Doesn't that just fly in the face of this idea that people and dinosaurs cohabited the planet at the same time? This really would turn the entire common descent story of evolution on its head if we accept that dinosaurs and man existed at the same time. And what I want to put here is a little video. This is put together by a guy named Sean Pittman, I believe. He's got a website, Detecting Design. I will warn you up front, it is selectively edited. It's not deceptively edited. It's just he did some creatively stringing together, and I thought he did a good job, so that's why I included.
He shipped the bone fragments that fell out to Mary Schweitzer.
So the first piece I pulled out, I picked it up and I looked at it, and I said, it's a girl and it's pregnant.
That's the first time, as I understand it, that anyone had ever been able to identify gender in any dinosaur.
Yes.
Mary recognized a specific type of bone called medullary bone, which female birds produce when they're about to lay eggs. No one had ever found it before in a dinosaur.
And she calls up and says, we have medullary bone.
Oh, now this had to be thrilling.
Yes, very exciting. And that wasn't all.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us videos she took under the microscope. That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old. So you see this, and you think, what?
I didn't want to tell anybody.
That you'd be ridiculed, right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, I was like shocked.
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones.
Look at that.
Blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science. That organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million. Mary, Jack, and their team published their B-Rex findings in a series of papers in the journal Science and were promptly attacked. Critics said their samples might have been contaminated, or that the supposed blood vessels were actually something called biofilm, a type of slime. But as Mary showed us, she's been able to replicate her findings. These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid...
Let's put this under the scope here.
Well, look. Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel. You see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time. I can't help it. I mean, 80 million years old.
Mary published her new results last spring. And while some of her critics have been swayed, the controversy still rages. And the stakes are high. If blood vessels can survive 80 million years, what about DNA?
Inside those channels where the blood vessels would have run were these little round red structures that were all kind of lined up like a train, and they were bright red and translucent. Nobody else had seen anything like that before.
The very idea of blood cells in a 70-million-year-old bone was more than unconventional. It was radical. Derek Briggs is curator of invertebrate paleontology at the Peabody Museum at Yale University. What was your initial reaction to that?
Oh, I think the same reaction as everybody's, that this was totally improbable. She perhaps misinterpreted the evidence or was exaggerating the potential for what she was seeing.
Has anybody else that you know of found similar things inside a bone?
No.
Why do you think it didn't occur to anybody?
The laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone.
70 million years old, you don't expect to find soft tissue, do you?
Not at all. No. It was utterly shocking. Like I said, a lot of our science doesn't allow for this. All of the chemistry and all of the molecular breakdown experiments that we've done don't allow for this. So if this material turns out to be actual remnants of the dinosaur, then yes, I think we will have to do some, certainly rethinking of some of the basics of the model of fossilization.
You know, Mary, when I was reading about this story, I was amazed that in some of the capillaries, when you went to pull them, they snapped right back. Are you amazed at the quality of these remains?
Absolutely.
70 million years old, huh?
It just doesn't seem possible. But yes, you can actually take the vessels, and they do have internal components, and so you can take a probe and kind of squeeze those things out into solution, and the vessels are fine. It's just, I can't explain it, to be honest.
Pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science.
Totally improbable.
Can't possibly survive even a million years, let alone 68 million. The stakes are high.
The very idea of blood cells in a 70-million-year-old bone was more than unconventional. It was radical.
You'd be ridiculed,
yes.
Right?
Why do you think it didn't occur to anybody?
The laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. And it's so consistent over and over and over again, over and over and over again.
So, anyway, yes, the dinosaur soft tissue find of Mary Schweitzer, and boy, the battle that raged for many, many years afterwards has changed and morphed in some degrees. It's now being generally accepted that, oh, well, okay, we really do have soft tissue of dinosaurs in dinosaur bones or fossils. And there's a lot of there was originally trying to blame it, as the article, as the video said, on contamination and on biofilms and other things, but it's generally now they're looking for mechanisms to keep organic tissues alive, or at least intact for millions and millions of years. It just doesn't fit the rules of chemistry, and some of the ideas that are being tossed around I don't find too compelling, but there's also mention here in this slide of 2009, scientists found a fossil of a duck-billed dinosaur that contained a host of soft tissue structures. The analysis of this fossil, done by multiple independent labs, concluded the fossil contained collagen, elastin, hemoglobin, and osteocytes. So we're actually finding these proteins, and this hadrosaur remains were almost, this is from the article that they published by the finders. The hadrosaur remains are almost entirely disarticulated, show little evidence of weathering, predation, or trampling, and are typically uncrushed and unpermineralized. Basically, that means that it wasn't even fossilized. This is bone. They are finding dinosaur bone. And of course, there was a big controversy that raged around the publication of this find. Interestingly, the popular press didn't mention this part of the find. They just talked about other aspects of this rather interesting find. But the original article, and you can get to all the pieces there from the references, mentioned that they weren't even fossilized. Turns out I found another example. In 1960, they were finding unfossilized dinosaur bones, but or at least soft tissues in dinosaur bones. And like Mary Schweitzer, though, nobody wanted to say anything because it's such a crushing, I shouldn't say crushing blow, but it is a huge problem for the paradigm of 67 or 100 or plus 100 million years of age to find these sorts of tissues in these dinosaur remains. Okay, but hey, here's a conundrum. If man and dinosaurs coexisted, shouldn't there be some evidence for it? Because it seems like, okay, fine, maybe whatever that prior evidence means. I think it means something remarkable. Dinosaur bones are younger than we ever thought. But if man and dinosaurs coexisted, shouldn't there be some evidence for it? I like to look at isn't that really the juxt of the matter, really the core of the issue. Well, let's look at this. If your child came home from school and had drawn a picture like this, your child's a very good artist, and forget that it has the word Stegosaurus printed across the top, wouldn't you suspect that, hey, I guess they're studying dinosaurs in school now, or they're looking at that chapter of the science book, they must be looking at dinosaurs, and maybe he's drawn this thing. If you found something that looked like this, you'd say, yes, this person has encountered either a dinosaur or a picture of a dinosaur, whoever drew this. And that would be a very reasonable conclusion to draw, I think. Well, let's come along and see what we find on this 800-year-old Buddhist temple in Cambodia. A creature, I can't think of any other creature that has this sort of growth on its back. A pig certainly wouldn't, a cow doesn't. Stegosaurs do. It's not the best representation, but it's sort of interesting. And how would people who, in evolutionary terms, came along in the last 100 to 400,000 years, depending on who you listen to, how would people have known about something that died 67 million years before that to be able to draw a picture of it or to carve something that detailed that looked like it? And okay, Steve, maybe this is just one. There's always exceptions, and exceptions may prove the rule. We really don't have much evidence of people and dinosaurs. Well, let's hang on to your seats. We have this. This is from a Mesopotamian cylinder dated around 3300 BC, and reference the art museum and the reference point for the animal on the right is an artist's conception of a skeleton of an apatosaurus, but on the left we have this cylinder. And again, note the anatomy. Remember I said keep that anatomy in mind, the leg, the center of gravity over the legs as opposed to the sprawling leg form of the lizard or other reptiles. We're going to see that over and over. I think this certainly looks kind of dinosaurish or like dinosaur-like. There's an urn from Caria. This was located in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. This artifact, described in a book called Art and Myth in Ancient Greece, is estimated to be from about 530 BC. It depicts what appears to be a mosasaurus with several known sea creatures. And that's an interesting theme you're going to see in these slides as I go forward. The dinosaurs are pictured and drawn and carved right alongside all of the other animals that these people would have encountered in their life. So for instance, you're going to see a seal back here on the left, and you're going to see dolphins over around this mosasaur, and you can even see an octopus. And yet here you have this thing in the middle for which there is no modern representation, and yet it's on this urn. The animal behind the sea serpent is a seal, while an octopus is below the sea serpent, along with what seems to be a dolphin. The thick jaws, now he's speaking of the anatomy of the mosasaur drawing here, the thick jaws, big teeth, large eyes, and positioning of the flippers on this creature match a mosasaurus skeleton very well. Some mosasaurus species also had a narrow cranial crest behind the eye that may have had a fin attached the way it is depicted in the Carian urn. And so that's a soft tissue portion that we don't have on the fossils, but we have the attachment point, a believable attachment point. So kind of remarkable that this drawing would have that if they'd never encountered such a beast. How about these rock paintings from Zimbabwe? Again, we have this, maybe these are dogs, but dogs don't have tails that are that big. We see the weight centered over the pillar-like structure of the legs, the large, thick neck and head. Um, you know, maybe not convincing in and of itself, but these things start to accumulate. Here's one that's going to be very difficult for you to see. This circle in the lower right-hand corner, I'm going to reverse the contrast on it. You can see that stands out a little bit more. This is from the Anasazi Indians in the southwest United States. Boy, it doesn't look like a giraffe or a duck. Does it look like something maybe a dinosaur-like? I think so. Here's one from the Grand Canyon. An example of Native American rock art carved into the walls of the Grand Canyon was discovered in 1879 by E.L. Doherty and documented in 1924 by a scientific expedition, which included Dr. Charles Gilmore, creator of vertebrate paleontology, U.S. National Museum. The resulting publication reported as, quote, fact, end quote, that, quote, some prehistoric man made a pictograph of a dinosaur on the walls of this canyon, end quote. Recently, they'd used it for target practice. So there's actually a little bullet hole here. Somebody hit it with a gun. That's what people do, I guess. Anyway, that drawing very well closely matches one of our textbook drawings of a particular type of dinosaur called an Edmontosaurus. I mean, these drawings are maybe not the highest degree of artwork, but they're close enough that we can match them to the type of animal they're depicting, if you accept that they had actually seen that. And I'm not sure how to not come to that same conclusion. This is 9 warriors down in Peru surrounding some sort of large beast with a large neck and again, weight over its large legs, a very long tail kind of disappearing into the diagram. And note that you have 9 warriors surrounding it. Why would you, if it was a dog or a cow, why would you bother painting that? That would be something that would happen all the time. And you wouldn't take 9 warriors to kill something that common. Now, this is being drawn because it was a significant event to represent. And so here's this monster and they're destroying it and they're going to draw it. Now, maybe someone made this all up, but I would challenge you to make up something that no one has seen. But let's say 1,000 or 2,000 years from now, someone will see it and it'll exactly match what you draw today. I challenged a person to that once, and he couldn't draw anything for me. I welcome you to try that exercise. Of course, neither of us will be around to confirm it. Hey, here's the Ica stones of Peru. These are fascinating. These were brought to light in the first half of the 20th century, post 1830, but the story is interesting. As a result of the overflowing of the Ica River, this flood caused the eroding of a mountainside, thus exposing a cave. The cave proved to be a repository of these stones. There are 16,000 of these stones. 11,000 were amassed by Dr. Javier Cabrera, former professor of medicine at the University of Lima, and displayed in his museum. Here's the key point. Controversy has raged over the authenticity of the Ica stones, the example above, since their discovery in South America. Skeptics have claimed, though without any real proof, that they are modern forgeries based on the premise that it is impossible for humans to have seen a living dinosaur. The stones remain a mystery and reinforce the intriguing possibility that the ancient Amerindians knew of such creatures. Yes, you can see certainly dinosaur-like, including the Triceratops type creature here. Here's a couple representations of those. This guy down in the lower left-hand corner, he's having a bad day. Getting into Triceratops here. And again, some of these carvings are so well defined. Here's a king riding something that matches something we've actually got a stamp for because we've discovered and put these things back together. I actually saw one secular person say the ancient man were great paleontologists. He proposed that ancient man was able to reconstruct these bones and come up with these shapes and figures. And I think that's silly. Paleontology is a relatively modern science, and it was not practiced by ancient Indians. At least I've never seen any evidence of that. The more interesting secular explanation, I think, comes from, I believe it was Carl Sagan, who said we have memories imprinted on our DNA that allowed us millions and millions and millions of years later to draw things that existed millions of years prior to our existence, because those memories were imprinted on our DNA. Now, that's going to be a harder one to disprove. I think it's a real stretch, but at least one of the explanations that is floated around to explain these diagrams and carvings and so forth. Hey, here's a French chateau. I find these interesting, so I hope you don't mind if I display a few more, and then we'll wrap this up and get to questions. Here's a French chateau from the Middle Ages, early 1500s, that has this dramatic dragon illustration. And this is part of a much larger, what's the word I'm looking for? Tapestry that has a horse and rider with, he's about to kill this thing. And it's basically the knight hunting down the dragon. And like those stories aren't all over the place. Were the dragons of the ancient world actually dinosaurs? I'm proposing that would explain some of this. Now, obviously, you have a legend and embellishment of stories and all kinds of things that happen through traditions and so forth that would stretch this beyond necessarily accuracy, an accurate record, but it's adding to in my mind, to the weight of evidence that man saw something that the best explanation for were dinosaurs. Okay, let's keep going. Again, in the castles in the Middle Ages, you see these tapestries. Here we have a lion of sorts grabbing some sort of winged creature that is fighting back on the left-hand side here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse when I circle it like that. Here's another common theme. And they made this as a lizard. I can't quite tell if the legs aren't sprawling out to the side. Maybe this is just a lizard, but it seems like a little. Why would you decorate this one of these is over a throne? Why would you decorate your throne with a lizard when you might want to decorate it with something much more majestic or much more fearful or something that, outstanding? And anyway, let's keep going here. This is a fascinating one. 1496, the Bishop of Carlisle, Richard Bell, was buried in a cathedral in the United Kingdom. The tomb is inlaid with brass, and unfortunately the flash makes this hard to see, but there are carvings in this brass that's all around the base of this tomb. And boy, those carvings have a remarkable similarity to dinosaurs. The huge necks, the way the legs are connected to the body, the large tail offsetting the large neck, and so forth. Here's another one that, again, not the greatest artistry. I could have maybe matched that with my ability, but certainly that's more than a dog. You wouldn't put that big of a tail on a dog. And plus, dogs wouldn't really be used to ornate things, I wouldn't think. They're just a little too common. Then you get to the Acambro figurines. These are in Mexico. These are pretty fascinating. A bunch of carvings. This Charles Hapgood, a dedicated archaeologist, revealed in 1973 the results of his laborious study of an extraordinary collection of 32,000 artifacts, which were the property of a German collector. The collection is comprised of ceramics, carved wooden objects, and engraved stones from all over the region around I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. The Acambaro in central Mexico. But let's let the pictures speak for themselves. Some of these pictures are so good that they can be closely put beside the actual artist or modern representation of the dinosaur, this particular dinosaur, for example. And not everyone is a dinosaur, obviously, but again, the point being, a lot of these figurines will have the duck, you'll have the cow, you'll have the elephant, and then you'll have the dinosaur. Maybe not the elephant in Mexico, but you get my point. In Peru, burial cloths. Again, these animals, is this definitive? Is this obviously a dinosaur? I don't think so. But in terms of its anatomy, the weight is above the columnar legs, big mouth and teeth, scary, rather large tail offsetting that. I don't know, maybe it's a dinosaur. And then we just get all kinds of urns and pottery and so forth. This is from the plesiosaur-like creature from Australia, from the Aborigines down in Australia. And again, a bunch of hunters surrounding this thing, showing their bravery in destroying it. Here's one of my favorites, the Palestrina Nile mosaic. A mosaic is like a painting or artwork that's put together from a bunch of little tiny tiles. This thing is huge. It's like the size of a wall. And in one little spot, you see these hunters, again, destroying or fighting, killing this animal with the large neck. And maybe that's a dog, but why would you portray that in this massive beautiful piece of artwork, um, first century BC. Then you have these books that were written by some actually pretty smart people in the Middle Ages. A couple more ideas here, then I'll move on to wrap this up. Um, Johann Johnston, Doctor of Medicine, he was an excellent documenter, and he said in the preface, "Some now extinct, all according to the author, carefully drawn from living models." One second. Excuse me, had to cough. Anyway, as you can see, this guy can draw very well, and we can recognize a lot of these bugs from what's in our yard today. But he also drew things like this in that same book. Now, was he just fantasizing? He claimed that these were all things he drew from either living or extinct examples. These are obviously the dragon type creatures that would have also peppered the legends of killing dragons and so forth. And so what would have killed the dinosaurs off after the flood? Well, I think man played a pretty big role in it. Obviously, it would be a feather in your cap if you could kill the biggest beast around, and then unfortunately, testosterone being what it is, I suspect man killed off the last remaining dinosaurs that did come off after the flood, at least in the centuries and millennia that followed. That's just a theory. I threw this in here not because it's a dinosaur. It's actually something from like the Burgess Shale. This is one of the early lower Devonian fossils. This is something we actually found in the fossil record. Creatures look strange in our history. And so if you say, oh, well, this is just too strange, nothing's ever looked like that, nothing alive's ever looked like that. Well, hold on a second. You can go to a science textbook and find creatures that look like this. There are some weird and crazy looking stuff out there. Another famous person from the Middle Ages, Athanasius Kircher. He may be one of the smartest men of the millennia. He would be in the top 100 probably. He was a prolific author and inventor, kind of like a Leonardo da Vinci type. And again, his drawings included these creatures that look like we would call them dragons, and then you don't have to go very far at all, just across the river, and you have the Piasa legend. And what's interesting about that, and you can do a little more background if you're curious, upon exploring the Mississippi River in 1673, Louis Joliet and Father Jacques Marquette noticed the strange likeness of a creature painted and sculpted on the side of the bluffs. Many of you have seen this outside just north of Alton. The creature was described as a large creature with horns like a deer, red eyes, a beard like a tiger, a face like a man, obviously embellished by legend and stories around the campfire. Body covered with green, red, and black scales, and a tail so long it passed around the body, over the head, and between the legs. The point is, the natives were were very fearful of the creature that lived in this cave that was along the bluffs there, and they had drawn these pictures and had all these stories about it. And so Marquette actually did a little more research into it, and you can read what he wrote about it. Seems plausible, but I don't think he ever saw it. But he did interview a lot of people who claimed they had. Was it a pterosaur or some sort of flying dinosaur? I don't know. Anyway, a few more of these types of things that we can find just all around the world, all around time, all over the last several millennia of time. Again, the elongated necks here, obviously, it wasn't the actual thing, but it's taking some artistic license with the idea. A few more of the Ica stones and the Canberra figures. And then here's one. The king is riding on top of this particular creature. Well, the skull, it really gives this away. That's there we actually have a dinosaur that has a skull very much like that. And it would be a big deal if you were king and you had your own and you could ride it and so forth, or at least be portrayed as being better and bigger than the Venus creature around. That's a theme. Which takes us to China. No shortage of dragon stories, dragon legends in China. Just consider this about the Chinese zodiac. Every animal on the 12-year cycle is an animal we could all relate to, except for which one? The dragon. The rest of these are animals known to everyday man, common man, and yet here's the dragon sitting again amidst all of these other common day animals. And of course, the amount of material that you can get relative to dragon and dragon legends in China is just very it's replete with that, down to the point where you can again identify from our paleontology, our modern paleontology, what they were actually representing with their utensils and their artwork and so forth. Just tons of this stuff, and I won't go into too much more of it here, because you've probably captured the themes, and maybe you can watch this later if you really want to get to these. I tried to footnote most of these. I didn't get all my footnotes in, but they're all out there, and you can search by picture. Here's an interesting one, and this is about wraps it up. Just take this one. This is $100,000. If you got this to spare, you can get this and put it in your living room. The about 1766 BC. Now, just look at that creature, and imagine the artist who put this together. We have the Wikipedia representative of the dinosaur that's very similar to it in the lower right-hand corner. But note, there's no front arms. Why would you bother? Like T-Rex, the little tiny little arms, you don't really bother with those. And you show the weight being rested, the long tail, the along the crest of the spine, the thing coming off the skull in the back. I mean, that is a remarkable thing to create artistically that just happens to match something we now know existed from the fossil record. And again, it's just one more example of, in my opinion, man representing man's evidence that man had seen, somehow recorded the existence of dinosaurs, and all the flying dinosaurs as well, different things. Let me get to the wrapping up slides here. So, are dinosaurs in the Bible? I say yes. I think at least some, many, perhaps all of the dragon references in the Old and New Testaments are actually referring to dinosaurs. It's a Tanyan. We didn't know what that word is, and so that word 28 times becomes dragon, 3 times serpent, 3 times whale, 1 time sea monster. I got this slide from my good friend Bill Barnes. Thank you, Bill. And the various reference points. And so we have these kinds of statements in Malachi. And I hated Esau, and I laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Well, what do we know now about dragons or about dinosaurs? They're giant reptile-like creatures that live in remote areas, like the wilderness, eat livestock, have scales, dermal spines, and long serpentine-like tails. Some, but not all, have bat-like wings, and they lay eggs. And they generally inhabit these isolated places like swamps, mountains, and so forth. You know, one of the things is, why don't we find man bones right next to dinosaur bones? Well, for the same reason I would submit, we don't find human bones and remains alongside crocodile remains. Yes, they're contemporaneous, but we don't inhabit the same ecosystems. We don't raise our children around a bunch of crocodiles. And in the same way here, you're not going to raise your family around a bunch of dinosaurs. So they're going to inhabit different areas. So although the flood certainly mixes all that up. Anyway, moving on to, what about other historians? Does he only mention this come from the Bible? No. After the close of the Old Testament, we have reliable eyewitness accounts of man and dragons living together. Here's a sample: Herodotus, Alexander the Great, Flavius Josephus, Pliny the Elder, Marco Polo, and Ulysses Alderabanus, I'm mispronouncing his name. Lots of these ancient writers refer to dragons and in encounters with dragons and slaying of dragons and this kind of stuff. So I would submit there is evidence that supports the biblical record that dinosaurs and man were created on the 6th day. And having said that, I will turn it back over to you, Zach.